Yeah, so my name's Warren Mansell. I'm Professor of Mental Health at the Enable Institute at Curtin University in Perth. Originally from the UK, I've been over here in Perth for the last 3 years. Before that, University of Manchester. My background is in clinical psychology. It's not in neuroscience. But to focus on the topic, perceptual control theory, I came across it in the late 90s when I was searching for a theory that could, for me at the time, resolve the discrepancies between all the major therapeutic approaches: cognitive therapy, behavior therapy, psychoanalysis, person-centered approaches. And I stumbled upon the theory in a book called Without Miracles by an incredible guy called Gary Ziko, Cziko. And it was on the topic of what's called universal selection theory. And the chapter in there on PCT really drew me in to read more. So I found the original book in 73 by William Powers. And for me at the time, it just integrated and explained why each of these approaches are effective, why they're different, and how they all combine, and therefore how a much simpler and more parsimonious way of supporting someone, listening to their story, working on a problem together can be far more efficient than other approaches. So that was my pathway in clinical, but perceptual control theory is being used by most disciplines across the social and life sciences, but it has its grounding in the physical sciences and engineering. So I met a lot of other academics and professionals along the way, including some in the military, sociologists, philosophers, etc. And I can explain the background of the theory in a bit, but where do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm interested. I think that's where we can make some interesting connections. So some of the
Yeah,
background, I think I saw
yeah,
cybernetics in there, and you mentioned some of the
yeah,
physical sciences.
yeah. I mean, I think you guys would have loved to meet Bill himself. I was lucky to meet him a couple of times before he passed away in 2013. He grew up at the time of World War II. He did a degree in physics, and during the war, he was in the Navy working on various anti-aircraft devices, various control systems that were being innovated at a really fast pace in the 40s. Then afterwards, he worked as an electronics control systems engineer. But throughout his early life, he'd been fascinated in psychology. His mother was a mental health nurse, and he sometimes would shadow her in her work and was just fascinated and perplexed about trauma, the effects of trauma, and more serious mental illness. And he got a hunch that he could use what he'd learnt about control systems to understand human psychology. And he actually made a commitment to himself after Hiroshima that he wasn't going to use his knowledge in physics to develop physics any further. He was going to use it for psychology and well-being and to help people build bridges. And so in the 50s, he embarked upon kind of laying down his theory, and he read some of the early cybernetics work, but really he was grounded in the fundamentals. He was a real blue collar guy. He was grounded in the fundamentals of how do these control systems work. And one day he just had this insight that these systems, although the common parlance, including in cybernetics, Norbert Weiner's landmark work, proposes that output is controlled, and that's just kind of shared down the generations. And he was looking at his electronic systems, and he was looking at this, and he realized, wait a minute, these systems are looping round and controlling their input. They are controlling what is coming into their sensors. They're not controlling their output. Their output is varying quite drastically and dynamically to keep those inputs within pretty close to a reference state. And then he started to look at other physical devices like a thermostat that basically controls the temperature of the room. Again, its behavior changes on a continuum, but quite dynamically to keep its set point controlled. And then he started to read about psychology and neuroscience. And in 1960. It's the first paper that came out, and the theory's pretty much unchanged since then. There were 2 papers at that time. And then he spent another 10 years, all the time while he was a control systems engineer working in astronomy and medicine, building these machines, writing his book. And it eventually came out in 1973, where he just sort of laid down the theory really clearly. The publisher was really successful in getting some good endorsements. Carl Rogers, who developed humanistic therapy, wrote a glowing endorsement of Bill's book. And then he proceeded to, raise awareness in psychologists and cybernetics about his theory, which, to be fair, was not very successful in kind of permeating the mainstream, and still isn't. And we are like 50 years on now. And we can talk about that later. But
sounds familiar.
Okay. But in terms of theory, so the basic theory is what we see as a behavior is a system's attempt to control its inputs. So any behavior does not need to be planned or predicted in advance. It is the observable side effect of that organism, that system, controlling its inputs. Those inputs are organized hierarchically in increasing levels of abstractness, increasing gestalts, if you like. And that there's a process, a learning algorithm called reorganization, which is analogous to evolution by natural selection, which kind of supplants variation at localized regions in this hierarchy for learning. And the most important reason to do learning is to resolve conflicts. And that's where one part of this system is fighting with another part. Where, for example, in a thermostat, it's when you've got 2 air conditioners in the same room, one's at 30 degrees, one's at 20 degrees. There is no stable state between, or if there is, there's a very high energy, unstable state between those 2 systems. And so it needs a level above that to configure the reference points, the set points for those 2 conflicting systems. And Bill proposed that psychological conflict is wholly analogous to that process. So, for example, if I've been traumatized and every time I think of the trauma that happened to me, it makes me feel distressed, that I'm losing my mind, I'm going to want to not think about that memory, and I'm going to want to avoid things that remind me of it. But at the same time, if I want to get back to work, go back into a high trauma job, or maybe if I'm a witness or a victim of a crime, I'm going to need to have to remember that memory in detail in order to get justice and make other people safe. So people in trauma are in the deep conflict between not ever wanting to think about the trauma and to maybe even tell themselves it never happened, but at the same time having to remember it in detail to maybe be a plausible witness or to be good at a job that has very challenging elements to it. I've done work in phobias on this, so people are in conflict about whether to approach or avoid, how near to get to something physical they're afraid of, whether that be a snake or a spider or whatever. But the analogy just extends, according to theory, to any part of our life. And even when we try and work out what flavor of ice cream to have, we're in a conflict state. So decision making is all about processing of conflict. And Bill said that, the theory sort of shows us that whilst there are various ways out of a conflict, the way that's going to be lasting is to go to a level above the conflict and do the reorganization process. So basically develop a perception of these conflicting systems that is novel, that allows them to be regulated and balanced in a way that's never happened before. And it's that part of the theory that I've taken forward into my own theory of consciousness based on PCT, which came out last year, and with the idea that and that's probably the bit that's the nearest to the free energy principle, which is that we are constantly looking for novel combinations of information to perceive something new in our worlds, because that will help us going forward in the future to kind of control and manage challenging novel situations. So yeah, I know I've talked quite a lot there, but hopefully I've
No,
covered
this
the
is great.
basics.
Moose, you got a light bulb there, brother. What's going on in your head, dude?
Well, Warren, you're another guest that Ponch and I would describe as knowing everything about John Boyd while knowing nothing about John Boyd, because the parallels and the synergies are off the page. I hear maybe Ponch. I hear so many things, like I hear conceptual spiral, I hear destruction creation, I hear mismatches, I hear novelty. Like it's. I'd love to see. I'd love to have Warren look through, the sources of destruction creation, but also too maybe like to peruse the list that Chet has on Slight Least of New of all the books that Boyd read, because I'm guessing that, like we found with McLuhan and like we found with others, that there's a lot of things that Bill was reading that Boyd was reading.
But also they were probably
at all.
They were kind of touching base with fundamental features of nature and humanity and behavior, and so there's there'll be convergent evolution between theories as well as direct influence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to go.
Yeah, that's
so the
hierarchies I'm hearing
sketch.
The hierarchies, I'm kind of building fractals in my mind. The control thing. Let's just start with. Can we walk through like an example? And Moose, do you have one in mind that we can use that we've used with OODA Loop before to kind of help us?
Like a scenario or something, or
maybe if we pick something like fifth generation warfare, cognitive warfare. And start there. I'll throw this out there.
I think you just kind of piecing a lot of what you're saying, Warren. I think of would powers say everything's conflict, right? Like everything is conflict is not like
No, well, conflict.
I guess what I mean to say, but like. Oh, go ahead.
Everything that troubles the world and stops us progressing is unresolved conflict. Conflict has got a very tight definition in PCT. Conflict is having basically opposing reference points, set points for the same variable. So and those set points are for control systems. So conflict doesn't exist if we just can't achieve something. If I want a cheese sandwich and there's no sandwich in my house, I just need to go and get it. There's no conflict there. No one's deliberately trying to hide the sandwich from me. Okay. So conflict in PCT has to be to do with two controlling systems that have inputs that they want. And that can be as simple as a homeostatic or thermostatic device, or as complex as a human being. But conflict only exists in the context of perceptual control, according to PCT. And that's kind of, part of this is about, in PCT, is explaining all this other stuff that isn't conscious before explaining what is conscious. And so there's so much that we do automatically. So when I'm talking to you, I'm just in my consciousness is really just the point I'm trying to get across. I'm not having to be conscious of all of the ways that I'm moving the muscles in my mouth and that I'm choosing words and knowing syntax. And that is being done automatically, according to theory, by my hierarchical control systems. And none of that processing needs consciousness, even though it's control, it's purposive, and it will resist disturbances. So if I'm in a very cold temperature, you've probably noticed this, that it actually slows your muscles down. They become tight, harder to contract. But if you just kind of focus on what you want to say, even if you're struggling to speak, you will just ride over those disturbances and say what you want to say. So PCT points out that control is an automated process, and we don't need to know about beliefs or probability, or we don't need to predict anything in order to engage in control. That just happens very smoothly, and it can operate in a device that has no information in it. So, for example, the Watts governor in a steam engine makes sure that the engine goes at a desired speed, a fixed speed set by the human in charge. And what it does is every time it goes a little bit too fast, it closes the valve from the furnace, and every time it goes a little bit too slow, it opens the valve to the furnace. That's a negative feedback control device. It works entirely through physical forces and has no information state. Obviously, the human controller decides the weight of these. There's balls that turn around, and it's a centrifugal force of those balls that sets the speed of the engine. But that system, because of the way it's organized in a closed loop. Because of that way it's organized, it controls, but it clearly has no consciousness, and it actually has no information. There are no bits in a Watts governor. And so what consciousness doesn't need to come along yet. Consciousness only needs to come along in the context of having having a brain that not unlike a Watts governor, a brain has neurons that can stand in for aspects of the world that we want to control, like our ambient temperature or my position from the screen. So it can have what we call perceptual signal for those that it controls. But as humans, we have this amazing open-ended ability to perceive and control many different things. So that's why we organize them in a hierarchy. But as soon as you start doing that, you create this massive kind of hierarchical branching system, which is going to be so vulnerable to conflict because one part of it isn't going to know what the other part's doing. And so consciousness in PCT is a spotlight that goes around this hierarchy, kind of mending bits to stop them conflicting with each other and to help them perceive and control what matters to them better. So within PCT, consciousness and a sort of novel learning, it comes quite late to the party. It kind of the first part of the theory is just the foundations of what is behavior in the first place.
Right. So here's a couple ideas that I'm hearing. So you have these habits of mind, this type 0 or type 1 cognition, these autonomic responses or automatic responses, intuition. So this is implicit guidance and control. That's kind of what I'm hearing when we're when we're looking at the OODA loop. There's a pathway control that just kind of happens. Yeah, it just kind of happens, and it's built off of the behaviors and those habits of minds that you build into, or muscle memory, or however you want to call it these days. Those things that you.
Although just to pause a moment, some of those terms are deconstructed by PCT. So like muscle, according to this, a muscle doesn't have a memory, but its proprioceptive sensory inputs might have a memory. But anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've been corrected to use habits of mind rather than muscle memory because of that. So we have that. You bringing up a little bit on control and novelty and consciousness, and what one of the things we've been exploring is John Boyd identified this not just through the Toyota production system. And I'll throw this statement out there. He pointed out that control is outside in, bottom up, right? Meaning that something, when you have a customer or you're delivering value to a customer or you're engaging with the outside world or you're meditating, control is outside in, bottom up. That's ultimately how things work. So novelty could be something we connect with when we are in a flow state. Steve Jobs and LSD coming up with these ideas, connecting to something out there. So there's information coming from the outside that's controlling these thoughts. And that's again, we don't know if this is true or not, but that's the way we're kind of we kind of understand things. And then consciousness, I know there's a lot of different theories out there on it, and there's no agreed upon definition of it. One way I look at it is consciousness is global, and we're all connected to it, right? Potentially, and it could be a local construct. I don't know, and maybe that's something we can dive into as well. But Moose, did I speak out of line on anything there? Anything that you would add?
No, I don't think so at all. I just did a quick scan of power sources versus voids, and there's like 14 for sure that are in common. Like that when you sweep his papers at Destruction and Creation and Powers Works, they were reading the same stuff. Like they were reading the same. The ones that jump off the page are just, we could just tell from the course of the conversation that we've had so far.
Yeah.
They were both looking into thermodynamics. They're both talking about Bayesian updating, systems thinking, Gödel, Heisenberg, thermodynamics, cybernetics, systems thinking. I mean, it's just like there's so much synergy. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and Warren, based on anything you just heard from either Moose or myself, can you kind of correct us on steer us correct or get us in a good direction where we need to refine some thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Bill at his heart wasn't an academic, but he worked with academics in the 50s, psychologists, to get his paper into publication. And so he did read and need to read some of those kind of key texts, particularly around cybernetics, but he was also aware of kind of information entropy, etc. But he wouldn't necessarily integrate them wholeheartedly into his architecture. He would just be aware of them and think carefully about where to place them. But so, I think the key thing that differs, and this goes right back to Ross Ashby, one of the early cybernetics and kind of organizational influences on cybernetics in organizations, is that that process of introducing variation into the system, randomness, if you like, in powers theory, that comes in to adjust the parameters of control systems that already exist and are working very successfully up to that point to control their inputs. So it's like there's two separate things here. Whereas Ashby, and as I understand it, the free energy principle, and other people who've used information entropy much more wholeheartedly, regard that process as fundamental to behavior, rather than a process that comes in a selective way to adjust the parameters of an existing system. And so, Bill Powers was aware of that parallel between his reorganization system and the kind of entropy reduction principle that, again, goes right back to the in psychology at least to before the 50s.
And he was very much an autodidact too, right? He was more of an independent than an academic, like Boyd.
Yeah. So, and that kind of independence kind of haunted him in a way, because he didn't necessarily have the connections and the students and the manner of expression to publish extensively in the kind of mainstream journals that you would hope. That said, he actually did. There's a great paper in 1978 in Psychological Review, which is one of the leading psychology review journals, and it's well cited. What partly happened is that Bill's ideas, elements of them permeated into some psychological theories, but not the whole theory bottom up.
But like Claude Shannon, Gödel, Heisenberg, second law of thermodynamics, and Piaget, like we would think that they had those in common. And they're citing they're citing all 5 of those things.
Yes, yes and no. So, you know, I've read. I'm not an expert on information theory, but I have read Claude Shannon's biography, um, and it strikes me that the fundamental of information theory is that there are particles of information, bits, as it were, and the whole theory hinges upon understanding a system in an either a categorical or symbolic or digital way, and that's been amazing for everything that we've done with the digital technology, and that's why we use phrases like bandwidth today. But according to Bill, the fundamental kind of embodied control systems in living organisms are not composed into bits of information. They are analog, dynamic, continuous systems. Obviously, an exception is the genetic code, which is a symbolic system, but that genetic code interfaces with the rest of the cell and the living organism, which has a whole variety of variables that are not easily decomposed into digital information. They are kind of concentrations of ions and salts and temperature and forces going around the body, none of which needs to be digitized. And so, I've got some YouTube work, YouTube talk where I put it across and put it to people that, and this is quite a profound point, but take it or leave it, which is that because information theory and computing in this kind of serial digital metaphor has been so successful, that's literally led to the technologies and the lifestyles that we have today. But actually, at that point in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a choice point in Norbert Weiner's work, which was called Control and Communication in the Human and Animal and the Machine. There was a choice point to go down the lines of control and understand that better, or to go down the lines of information and communication and understand that better. And pretty much everyone went down the line of information, rather than trying to scrutinize what is control, what is power, how do we understand how people use information to exert control over others, and how can we understand those control, those dynamics both within a person but also operating at the political and the economic level. And Bill Powers chose to go down the control line and understand control in much more fundamental detail. And with it coming up with some quite profound messages for psychology and mental health and sociology, that really are almost like an orthogonal line of work to all the work that was done in information theory. The fascinating thing, it's so fascinating. Claude Shannon and Alan Turing are kind of such fascinating characters and incredible
geniuses. Yeah, they were not boring. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I watched the Imitation Game with my sons, and it gets me very emotional. But Alan Turing actually believed, again, according to his biography, that you couldn't explain the soul of a living person with his theory. That actually a soul occupied a spiritual realm, and so he still held on to some quite supernatural ideas about human will and volition. And equally, Claude Shannon spent the last 10 or 20 years of his life trying to understand how juggling works. And he built all these mathematical formulas of juggling. And none of that was information theory. He came up with some interesting formulas, but I don't think he explained it. And I genuinely believe that both these incredibly intelligent men missed out on that understanding, because they wouldn't take the leap that Bill Powers did, which is to say, purpose, or teleology, if you like, is inbuilt into a living system. It's even in a very primitive way inside a thermostat, that you don't need consciousness, you don't need a soul to have a purpose. And a purpose in operational terms literally means making the state of the world as you perceive it the way you want it to be. And actually that can be done
like manifestation,
that is so just having any system that can internally specify some variable aspect of the world and has some way of acting against the world to keep that state of the world the way that it's internally specified, has a purpose and it has a goal and it can control. And so a thermostat controls, I'd have to fight a thermostat if I wanted to change the temperature of a room. They can be pretty powerful just within the realms of temperature. Obviously I can break the system, but if I wanted to counteract it with fires and, ice and whatever, it would take quite a lot of effort on my part. So the world is a world of purposive agents. Most of them are living, some of them aren't. And we need to understand that. One example where this is very challenging is in the world of algorithms. So whilst the programmers might think that their algorithm is innocuous because it's giving them revenue, sometimes these algorithms can inadvertently create control systems. So the Facebook algorithm to keep the users attending as long as possible, it will do anything that it needs to do to increase the user's attention and bring in whatever information and links that it needs to. It has no other goals. So it's a very simple control system, but it has incredible resources. And that's why you get really disastrous effects sometimes of those algorithms, like in the Myanmar massacres, where people were just attending to dangerous information. They were attending to misinformation about ethnic groups, and they were sharing all kinds of inflammatory dialogue because the algorithm was purely controlling one variable, which is to try and get as much attention as possible. And in the heat of an ethnic conflict, that's going to get the attention. And that's a really good example of where consciousness is not involved and probably should be, because consciousness does the exact opposite. Consciousness is about how do you balance hundreds of different things that are important to the system in a way that's nimble and utilizes limited resources, and kind of hopefully maintains the sort of survival and well-being of the person with the consciousness and those that they are connected with. So I guess I'm again a bit of a diatribe, and I'm not trying to say understanding information and computing is bad in a kind of Philistine kind of way. What I'm saying is that far too much intellectual thought has gone into understanding information, and hardly any has gone into understanding control. So yes, Claude Shannon and Turing were kind of incredible figures, but they weren't really the direct influencers on Bill Powers' ideas.
So social media, going back to the Facebook example there, in order to create these algorithms that target the orientation, I'm using John Boyd's term, so the mental model, how we view the world, if we understand that through psychology, cognitive science, and other sciences, how we can be manipulated, then you design that algorithm to target that, right? So is this kind of connected back to that control idea? I mean,
I think
connects it to it.
Yeah, what PCT always gets you to do, and this comes through in Method of Levels, which is both a therapy but also a kind of introspective style of conversation. It always gets you to ask the question of, oh well, what's the point of doing that? Why would you want to do that? Who's in charge of this, and what else does this matter? Who else does this matter to? So you're constantly interested in going a level above what's being done and trying to ask the question, well, where are these goals being set, and why are they being set that way, and how are they going to come up against other goals in the system?
So you're looking at the system. I mean, so going back to complex adaptive systems and systems theory, if you understand the system, you can understand the behavior or design a system that controls the behavior. Is that where you're going?
If in PCT you understand the system when you understand its goals, and its goals are very complex and hierarchical, you'll only be able to predict the behavior in a quite a restricted environment, because the behavior will change dynamically for that system to control what matters to it. So we can predict what people want if we know what their goals are, although there will be some reorganization. We can predict their behavior, but only in a restricted environment. So, for example, if you build a control system, a simulation of tracking a target on the screen using PCT, and the person is only interfacing with, say, a mouse to track the target on the screen, you can actually build a very precise model of their behavior to about 99% level of accuracy. You know exactly where they're going to move the mouse next, because they've signed up to that one goal of keeping the cursor tracked. And you can actually get someone to unconsciously and unknowingly write words on the screen that they are completely unaware that they're writing, because you're making a disturbance that they have to push against to keep the cursor on the target. So they're like pushing this thing around to keep the cursor on the target, and you've got a display of how they're moving the mouse whilst that's happening, and it writes the word hello at the top of the screen. And then you ask them, did you write that word? Did you notice that word? It's like, no, I was just keeping the not over the dots. I was keeping the cursor tracker there.
Mm-hmm.
So what it shows is, yes, if you understand, you don't want to understand someone's behavior. You want to understand someone's goals, what they're controlling.
Okay.
If you know what someone is controlling, you can manipulate them very well, even without them being aware of it. And that's why people can be easily exploited when they're in vulnerable situations, particularly if they are focusing and they're overvaluing one goal in their life. So someone who's addicted to a drug, for example.
Yeah. So knowing the goal of the agent is important. The behavior is an outcome of that goal potentially. Right?
The behavior is a means to achieve that goal in a certain environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So understand. So this is like getting inside the OODA loop. That's what we talk about. And Moose, I'm going to ask you a question on this. So if we understand what's driving, what the goal oriented approach is for that agent, if we understand that, that's what we can manipulate. And manipulation, we also talk about leadership, manipulation, leadership being opposite sides of the same coin. So can you use PCT in a leadership, I guess, not training, but to help understand leadership? Okay.
Yeah, and there's books written on that, because it's kind of exactly, how do you do the opposite? How do you help people achieve their own goals and reorganize their own goals in a way that maintains their well-being? By far the most effective skill is curious questioning. So giving people a space to explore what matters to them, both in this context but also more widely, and just sustaining that time period continuously. So Method of Levels is about it's like a supercharged active listening. You are letting the person talk about the problem, the conflict, and you are keeping them there with your questions. Your questions are fairly brief, fairly regular. It's like, oh, how does that work? Where's that going? What do you want to do next? What's coming into your mind now? And so you just keep them there. And if probably takes about 5 or 10 minutes to get going, but these conversations can be half an hour or so, and people by the end of those conversations come out of it because they've been in charge of the conversation. They just use the questions to scaffold and explore in much more depth and detail. So they come out of those conversations with much better insight as to how to deal with this situation.
No, I'm just taking a look at some of my documents in here from like flow states, red teaming techniques, and I'm starting to see this pop up more and more in some of those books. So there's a lot of overlap with what we talk about here.
I'm thinking, I've been thinking Boyd, of course, and I also scanned their papers. So I guess Powers' papers are at Northwestern University.
And then, they are. Yeah, they're held there in the archive. Yeah, but they're also online
and
as well.
Boyd's are at Quantico, and they have, what we would expect. Their overlap is around these ideas of cognition and cybernetics and other things. But at the same time, I also, as Warren was talking, I keep thinking of McLuhan and Teilhard too, because all medium work us over completely, right? All media work us over completely. And I wonder if that, we say all the time, systems drive behaviors. I think that a lot of that, like we were talking, like say example, we were talking about manipulation. I actually started thinking of Edward Bernays, because I think that he understood that people were goal oriented, and by speaking to those goals and getting those people to act on those purposes of wanting to be, pretty, so by makeup, or wanting to be fit, so they buy a gym membership they ended up not using or whatever. But like no, but then that also ties back into McLuhan with the medium being the message, and all the environment and the technology being extensions of the human, some human function. In the age of electronic media, that's overriding our central nervous system.
Yeah,
that's forcing these types of behaviors. I'm curious if if Powers ever talked about McLuhan, and the things that he was thinking about, because I think the other thing too, and I'd ask you, Warren. I mean, it seems like Powers is not as lauded as he could be, just like Boyd or McLuhan are not. That like Powers is kind of thought as an afterthought. He wasn't a serious academic compared to others.
And he also wasn't in the corporate world either.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I see more connections. Again, I ask you. I mean, did he have any, like the work of Marshall McLuhan? Powers, if he lived to 2013, then they certainly were alive at the same time, and he would have come into contact with his work.
I'm not sure. He certainly had conversations with various other theorists about his work. I know more about the psychologists he talked to. But I do think that what Powers is articulating are basically just laws of nature. That you can put his name on it, and you can look at other people's names, but
I'd say about the other guys too.
Yeah.
They're discoverers. They're not inventors. They're discoverers of how the universe worked.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
Yes, I go.
The connection back to the free energy principle. I know you shared some information with me. Can you just walk us through the major difference between PCT and FEP? If I don't know if that's possible.
I mean, I can't speak in too much detail on the free energy principle. The paper that I shared, I edited that paper as part of a special issue that's in Current Opinion in Behavioural Sciences, and Richard Kenaway, who wrote that article, made his best attempt to describe the free energy principle, but I still think he, would err towards those experts, particularly Carl Friston, in that regard. And I've had conversations with Carl, and he's got a real respect for perceptual control theory. He wrote a wonderful endorsement for our interdisciplinary handbook on perceptual control theory in 2023. So he recognises that PCT is foundational. That said, most people that use the free energy principle do not reference powers, and that is because they come from very different starting points. They converge in the fact that they are both describing closed loops, whereby a system is interacting with its environment in a dynamic closed loop manner. But their starting points are different. So, like I say, start points of PCT are, in a way, they're very simple. They are classic control theory. So the negative feedback control in its rawest sense. And they are introspection. So Bill Powers used his own introspection to make hypotheses about what the perceived aspects of the world might be that a human controls. They are the building
What's the
blocks.
purpose beyond stability, though? Like for PCT, like, is there a sense of direction? What's the purpose beyond stability?
Yeah, no, the purpose is only really goes back to, well, in the long term, it goes back to evolution and survival and reproduction. So we're born with intrinsic control systems. So we have ones that maintain our body temperature, energy supply, hydration, etc. So those control systems have evolved through evolution. We're born with them. There are probably some in utero adjustments, but they are like the teaching signal for the perceptual hierarchy. And they continue to evolve, like they would continue to evolve towards something. So what Boyd would say in, like, say the in destruction creation, like we destroy and create cognitive models in order to improve our capacity for free and independent action. In other words, that as time advances, we're improving, or there's some kind of like a teleological arc where Teilhard would say that we're evolving towards what you call the omega point, but like there's some kind of a forward evolution, and that's what I'm worrying about PCT. Is beyond stability, is there a sense of direction or purpose beyond just mere stability? Well, according to PCT, stability is a purpose, but stability in the short term will not ensure the survival of the organism in the long term. So that's why we develop this rich perceptual hierarchy, which doesn't have a lid, doesn't have a ceiling. And that's why we're conscious, because we continually are experiencing challenges to our stability, and those are evolving dynamically in a biological, physical, social world. So we continually need to pay attention to those conflicting goals that are manifested in our current environment, and that will lead us to develop higher level perceptions of ourselves in the world. So that process will go forward, but actually the training signal for that process is our biology. We have developed these sophisticated perceptions of ourselves in the world to consistently maintain those biological set points, so that we're happy, we're comfortable, we're surviving into the future, and that's how the hierarchy kind of develops. But obviously, at any one moment, we don't need to be thinking about those things. We're just thinking about how we want our lives and our families and our world to be, and that is a purpose in itself.
But he's not chasing equilibrium, right? Like he's not like stability. It's not like the absence of things changing. Like he's not trying to get to like an
No,
equilibrium
no.
point.
Well,
It's
yes
like
and
it's
no.
just like
So
like
a controlled variable is a special kind of equilibrium. So it's not a controlled variable isn't a static state. A controlled variable is a perception that's the way you want it to be. So I can have a desired state for what music I want to listen to, which evolves over time. I can have a desired state for how fast I want to run. So you can have a reference point for a variable that is changing in a complex way, but it's changing in a complex way
we're
that you
comparing
want.
between all states, right? Like we're comparing that reference to something else to aspire to that change. So like if I'm cold, I put on a sweater. Like I'm comparing those things constantly so I can adjust and reduce the error or to
Yeah.
achieve that desired end result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll experience conflict if you're in a hot room and someone's just bought you a lovely sweater and you want to and you want to keep it on to show them that you like it.
Okay.
Yeah, because now I start thinking of Ludwig von Mises and praxeology is that in our being, in our cognition, that we're constantly, when we think as human actors in economic action, we're thinking of, we encounter felt uneasiness and we envision what it's like to overcome that uneasiness. So we make the necessary adjustments to make the decisions and actions to achieve that point where we think that, I guess as Powers would say, we reach a point of stability.
Yeah, we reached the reference point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess I made a decision a while back to kind of, when I saw and understood the architecture, to think this is kind of all I need. I'm not going to have to jump around different theories anymore and use different words for stuff. I've got this as my kind of Rosetta Stone for behavior, and it's done me pretty well for the last few decades. So, that's kind of what I go back to, and it does make life a lot simpler when you only have to think of one theory rather than, dozens or hundreds.
Well, don't you think it's interesting to point out that all these guys coming from different disciplines even come to a similar conclusion?
Yeah,
I mean,
they're finding this basic
psychology,
law of nature.
economics, engineering. Yeah. What are the gaps? Like, do you think? Like, what are the limitations of PCT?
Well, it explains control and expands on all of those aspects of control. It doesn't try and explain something that doesn't involve control. So there are things that are in the world that don't control. So it doesn't try and explain those things. The other aspect is that it's kind of a meta theory. So a lot of theories in science have gained purchase and become popular because they've been much more strategic about the topic that they're explaining or the instance of behavior that they're explaining, and so they can be a bit more specific about those and therefore test them in much more deeply because they're in that one zone, say, of tracking or vision or flight or whatever. And so a big challenge for PCT is that because it's this kind of universal theory of control, it doesn't pre-specify how these architectures are organized for any particular context, for any particular animal, for any particular person in any particular context. Those have to be derived by the researcher using what's called the test for the controlled variable, which is to try and work out what is this person or machine trying to control. So it has the tools for it, but it can't sort of pre-specify and say, what are the 10 most important goals for a person biologically. It's not in the job of doing that, but obviously other people do that, like safety and shelter and etc.
Does it assume a neutral environment?
It assumes an environment of feedback functions, disturbances, and a load of other stuff. So what the environment I guess, is, it's highly intricate and complex, but for the individual, what's important to the environment is what are the feedback functions, which is basically what are the aspects of the environment that I can use to make my sensory experiences, my inputs, the way I want them to be. That some people call that affordances from ecological theory, but feedback function has a more teleological kind of way of understanding it. So the environment is either a feedback function or it's a disturbance, and disturbances are what get in the way of making the world the way we want it to be. And those disturbances, again, can be of all different kinds, of all different levels. And what Bill Powers kind of discovered very early on is that a couple of things. One is that the environment is so complex that it would be extremely computationally challenging to try and actually model the environment. There's just too many variables there of irrelevance to the organism to even bother. The second thing he realized is that, again, because the environment is so complex, the system has to specialize in trying to counteract the disturbance, and even trying to predict all of the possible disturbances to any one movement at any one time is, again, very computationally challenging. So what it just needs to specialize in is what it can do to counteract a disturbance to its current desired perception at that point. So it doesn't presume that it knows what the disturbance is going to be in advance. It just acts as soon as it notices that goal discrepancy. And we've built computer models and robotic models that work just fine without that capacity for prediction. So like an inverted pendulum, for example, that is just as stable as a model that uses that actually tries to simulate and predict the environment.
I'm curious if there's any AI approaches using PCT, like as a fundamental way to do predictive processing or anything like that.
Yeah. So good question. Strictly AI in the sense of the current developments in algorithms, machine learning, and generative AI. There's none that have come directly from PCT. There are several people who are working in that area, particularly in terms of robotics, who are building software that is it's artificially intelligent, but it's not generative AI. So for example, Henry Yin at Duke University and Rupert Young, both of them have got publications and videos of the robots that they've designed, built the software controllers for using PCT. Again, that part of their advantages are their elegance, really, their computational simplicity, and they tend to achieve the same skills as robots that don't use PCT, but in a much more parsimonious way and in a more transparent way. You can look inside the network and you can just see exactly how it works. You say, oh, this controls that and that controls this. So it's not a black box. So Rupert Young has used reorganization to build these control hierarchies. And so the system evolves control hierarchies and optimizes the ones that achieve the goal best. And so you can just look at the network and you can see exactly why it can balance or why it can walk or whatever, because it actually makes sense. It's not just a massive, tens of thousands of neural connections, even though that might end up achieving the same function.
Go ahead, Moose.
No, it's just like I guess when I think of PCT, I'm thinking of like OODA Loop. PCT seems more linear versus OODA Loop being more nonlinear, more simultaneous, more recursive.
No, that's not a difference.
You'd say
No.
there's no difference. Maybe it's just semantics then, but it's just what
PCT is is continuous, parallel, two-way, hierarchical system.
Okay.
Well, then what role does environment though? I mean, you said disturbances and like a load of other stuff, but like I guess I'm trying to square how environment and medium overcome our senses. Because of something, I guess I was kind of asking about like the neutrality of environment.
Yeah, maybe I'm not sure what you're meaning by the word neutrality.
Well, like how we're communicating now. I mean, how you're in Australia, I'm in New York City, Ponch is in Virginia. I mean, we're the medium is the message, right? Like the environment is driving how we sense things, how we perceive things, not necessarily the content. So that's restructuring our perception. And I'm just trying to square how PCT, if the form of the environment itself is what's restructuring our perception, as McLuhan taught. Like how does PCT model that form bias of the environment? Like how does it allow for that to shape our perceptions? I guess I keep thinking of the environments aren't neutral. There's cultural traditions, there's genetic heritage, there's physical environments, there's evolutionary environment. There's so many things that are not neutral, and I wonder if that's the load of other stuff because you said disturbances plus a load of other stuff, and I'm just wondering if that's the load of other stuff.
I think the active, according to PCT, the active elements of the environment are the disturbances and the feedback functions. But they are in a shared network. There's really nice work written by Kent McClelland, who's a sociologist, who talks about how the environment is involved in these feedback pathways between agents. And the environment is set up. We create our elements of our environment to achieve our goals for one another and for ourselves. So that's why we build the kind of tools, and I think nearly everything I can see around me is something that someone's built at some point or designed at some point to achieve a goal, in terms of the table to put my stuff on and this screen to see you guys. And so the idea is that the environments that people create is there either to help them or other people achieve what they want, or to get in the way of people achieving what they want. And that from a sort of anthropological context, that's what artifacts are. They are there built by the purposes of the agents that design them, and then they come into use when they're sort of scaled up at that global level.
So Warren, I want to kind of end on this note here, and that is, if you were to kind of summarize why either a leader or an organization, or why anybody should understand PCT, what do they get out of that? And I'll add some more context to this. When people ask us that question about the OODA Loop, we're like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere, right? When we see it, and I have a feeling that it's kind of the same thing with you. It's kind of, PCT is what you see everywhere, and then what we see is OODA Loop, and we're not. We may be saying the same thing, but we're using different words. So could you help us frame it for what value people get out of in any profession? Would they get out of it by learning this?
Yeah, I've developed a form of conversation called discovery talk, which is essentially method of levels, the therapy that's developed by PCT, but in a much more scalable way that people can use in all kinds of contexts to resolve problems. And the core to that is control, conflict, and reorganization. And so PCT gives a really, I think, straightforward, common sense, but also scientific basis for what control is, understanding how important control is, understanding that behind most problems that we have or organizations have is conflict. And we need to understand where that conflict is and understand both sides of it in detail. And reorganization, which is this kind of inbuilt process of change, and change in a way that you can't plan ahead, and that that time spent thinking and contemplating and exploring and orienting towards a problem in all its aspects gives that opportunity for reorganization. And you can't will it into existence, it just happens. And so those three aspects, to understand who's controlling who, why they're controlling, who's controlling what, how do we build an organization where people control what matters to them in their lives, and as an organization we control what we need, and it all works in a harmonious, conflict minimal way. When conflicts arise, what do? We pay attention to them. And how do we pay attention to them? In depth and detail, until we just get ideas, we get thoughts, and that's reorganization happening. So yeah, that's how I would sell it to an organization. I also think it works well if people are naturally humanists, or if they're naturally engineers, because there's two very easy routes there to think, it's just we work like, or if they're biologists, it's a bit like homeostasis but through the environment. It's a bit like how a thermostat works. It's a bit like what Rogers was saying about the self being fundamentally goal-driven, and help needs to be person-centered and person-led.
Again, the overlap between what PCT is and what we talk about with the OODA Loop is I mean, I think they're like a hand in a glove. It's just that we haven't heard this before, and that's why I'm scratching my head. Like,
and I have read about the top end of the OODA Loop. What comes up when you search for it, and
and that's not what it is.
That's garbage.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and that's important, because when people, academics search for it, they find that horrible linear approach to observe, orient, decide, act. First you observe, then you orient, then you decide, and then you act. That's not what it was designed to do. Never was designed like that.
Right.
Well, and they're also, when you think we talk about Boyd, McLuhan, Teilhard, they're also extremely multidisciplinary. I mean, they were these were men that were coming at it from so many different angles simultaneously themselves. I
mean, I would certainly be, if you want to send me what would be a good summary of Boyd's account, I'll have a good look over it.
Yeah, I mean, he was a polyglot, or not a polyglot, a polymath. I mean, he was an economist, an engineer, a fighter pilot, a historian, a philosopher. Teilhard was a Catholic priest. He was a theologian. He was a philosopher. He was a paleontologist. Marshall McLuhan was an English literature scholar and a media theorist. I mean,
so they write for different audiences at different times. And,
maybe I see the synergies as like the technical things that I'm sensing, what I'm gathering from PCT. It seems like none of them would disagree with any of that. I think where they would say that their theories take that and add a lot more, because they allow for the simultaneity of the universe, the multidimensional of the universe. I mean, it seems very, Cartesian, flat and linear, versus the way that they were looking at the world, very, very multidimensional. And that environment and terrain, they're not neutral. Those things, maybe what I'm hearing is that maybe that's just a way of just saying there were disturbances, but
there's no claim that the environment's neutral in PCT. And Powell's was a physicist. He knew everything about the physical complexities of the universe, but they're just
as was Boyd.
not part of
so like there's a lot of synergy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Boyd also designed. I mean, we forget about his physicist contributions of designing energy maneuverability theory, which informs all modern aviation design. So, I mean, there's multiple angles.
Cool.
I do find it interesting that he was a physicist commenting on things that had a psychological bent. So that's cool. Yeah. But I think, if anything, I think we've started something. We've started a dialogue, like an avenue or an angle that people certainly aren't talking about, and I love derided, suppressed thinkers like a Powers, that nobody knows of, that was dismissed because he wasn't an establishment academic or that kind of thing. Because neither was Boyd, So maybe we've started something neat.
Maybe
you've lit a fire. You lit a fuse under this.
Create a virtual conversation between them. Train a few AIs and get them talking to each other.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people are doing that. Again, I think there would be a lot more. They wouldn't stop at psychology or physics. I mean, they those guys would add a lot. I just think there's a lot more to it because humans are so complex and unique. But as you say, it doesn't say that the environment's not neutral. That's the other. I guess that's the other thing I'm thinking, because like in Boyd's case, like the enemy gets a vote. There's an adversary. You're in a competitive. What would PCT? Well, maybe I'll just ask you, like, what would PCT in a competitive situation, and like say Force A versus Force B, or football team A or B or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's Phil Farrell, has used PCT for the Canadian Defence Service for a while. He's retired now, but so Phil Farrell is a good reference for that. FARRELL. I've done a little mock-up of a predator-prey situation and modelling that. But essentially, it's a conflict dynamic where you've got an agent that's controlling for what its variables, and you've got the competing agent controlling for its variables, and obviously they will interface through the environment. So you can set up those models. There's also a demonstration that Bill Powers made called the crowd demo. So all of these, most of what I've been talking about, you can find on the IAPCT website, which is iapct.org. And that includes Bill Powers' computer demos. And one of those is from his 2008 book, which is like models these agents with specific goals and shows how they compete for space, for location, etc. So yeah, it would basically, I guess the answer is it would build the simulation, test it, and use it to answer the questions that you might have regarding that competition.
So I wonder if you could tell our listeners where they can find more about your work and any work that's about to emerge from your desk, your mind. Where can they find you?
So in terms of my own work, I think probably so my Curtin University web, if you search me up at Curtin University, you'll see my list of publications. But also if you go to my thread on X, then I think any new publications, I'll always put something up there. And on LinkedIn, I'll have more of a academic introduction on those. So, and then of course, I've got a web address, which is particularly, we haven't talked too much about the mental health aspects today, but that's my main focus of my research. So we have a research group called LEX, called Led by Experience. So that's ledbyexperience.org, and that's the focus of that is to describe the particular research projects that we're doing to improve mental health through universal, scalable solutions that are guided by PCT, but also because of PCT guided by the lived experience of people who've gone through those mental health challenges.
Do they talk about psychedelic therapies at all?
So again, I've got a great reference for psychedelic therapies, which is Sarah Tai, Manchester.
What's the
AI. So Sarah,
spell it one more time.
Sarah, SARA. So I'm just realising I need to print. Need to plug my computer in. This won't look very great on the podcast. So Sarah, SARA, and then Tai, TAI, and she's at University of Manchester. And so Sarah trained up the professionals who supported people who use psilocybin psychedelics for resistant depression. So she's the kind of authority on perceptual control theory in the use of psychedelics, and she's got there's a couple of YouTube videos as well that she explains her work.
We're our interest. We've done a lot of podcasts on the topic. Our interests are, Ponch and I are both veterans, and our other two business partners are, and we're we know lots of our peers and that have gone through a lot of trauma and have gotten a lot of help and relief using psychedelic therapies for their PTSD versus SSRIs. So I don't know, Ponch, what are we up to? Like 9 or 10 episodes on psychedelics?
Oh yeah, and there's more coming. So
and there's a lot more coming. Yeah.
But what's funny is people don't like listening to those things because they're like, well, that's nonsense. That's woo. That's, tell me about how my dog can be a leader with OODA Loop. And you're like, really? Yeah. That's what you're interested in? So I think the things that save lives and that are really cutting edge are difficult for people to tune into if their orientation, or in this case, the variables are they're not expecting that. So
did people actively try to suppress, like, we're talking about how Bill Powers is not as well known. I mean, did he have enemies that people tried to suppress his views and didn't want to I guess upset their own intellectual apple carts? Like Boyd was like that.
So he really wanted to join in with cybernetics, but by the time he came onto the scene, it was second order cybernetics. Not that he would totally agree with first order cybernetics, but he was apparently talked down at cybernetics meetings. I've talked with and presented at cybernetics meetings more recently, and they're somewhat open, but there's certainly no plans, as I understand it, to bring Powers back into the explicitly into the cybernetics realm. So he had a hard time in cybernetics, and there's also an interesting debate with Albert Bandura, who developed the construct of self-efficacy, and so they were. It was through a different. It wasn't Powers directly, but there's an interesting debate between Alfred Bandura and PCT through Jeffrey Vancouver, who uses PCT in an organizational setting. They're the two most obvious ones where there was actually kind of deliberate kind of questioning. It was still very respectful, but somewhat dismissive. But most of the difficulties have been more in just people not noticing it, not thinking it's relevant, not wanting to read it in depth to really understand what it is, or using, as I say, elements of it for their own ends, but not really incorporating the whole architecture. And I've written a book chapter in 2020 which I think I've called the 10 vital ingredients of perceptual control theory, their journey into the mainstream, something along those lines. Can't remember the names of everything. Anyway, I really track where you see elements of PCT where they've been explicitly acknowledged, and some explanation of why it's not been. I do think that one of the main reasons is that people have a hard time thinking that purpose is hardwired into the brain. As scientists, we've come so far by not believing in creationism or kind of supernatural beings with purposes designing the world for us. We've got so far through to going in a reductionist direction that I think people throw out the baby with the bathwater and don't want to see purpose where they find it. And I would say a control system is a purposive system, and it just is. It makes happen what it wants, and yes, there's constraints on that, but the control is coming from within. It's not a stimulus response system. It's not a prediction engine. It's a control system. And I think people have a hard time thinking that something so simple could have a goal, of its own. And, and I think, that's just something that's kind of like a jump that you make when you grasp PCT and think, oh yeah, I can see how that system wants this.
There's an odd connection that you just brought up there. So I just read Andrew Gallymore's new book. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. It's 2 words. I'll think about it in a second. But DMT. He claims that DMT, is when you use it. Psychedelic DMT.
Psychedelics.
So ayahuasca,
psychedelic, is it? Right.
Yeah. That it actually controls you. Right.
Yeah.
You're not experiencing something. So this thing from the outside is controlling you. So I mean, it doesn't matter if it's an alien life form or whatever, but that type of control is possible, right? That's why when you said that, the purpose there is it controls the experience that you're having in the outside world, or in the world that you're not used to.
So I guess the simplest, that I'm sure there'll be levels to the PCT explanation of psychedelics, but in its simple terms, it basically down regulates our control systems, and that allows natural variation in the neural systems, which we call reorganization, to be more evident. So we are reorganizing all the time. That's part and parcel of consciousness. But that degree of reorganization can vary. It varies very little in a normal person, but arguably psychedelics raise relative downregulation of all our habitual control systems, and the upregulation of the reorganization system is what is the active ingredient of psychedelics. But that's why it's so important that they're delivered in an environment that the person feels safe and in control, because feels quite uncontrollable anyway. So they need that environment of predictability, and also the potential to direct that reorganization system to where it matters, which it might do quite naturally, but sometimes the person who's with them, with their sort of gentle questioning, can help them get more out of the experience than they would have otherwise. And that's what Sarah's been working on.
So what about prayer and like meditation and breathing, some type of flow state, right? It downregulates, it just all the same. Okay, there we go. That's what I'm thinking.
It's all the same as is exposure. You're holding off your usual attempts to push something that you don't really want to hold in mind back to the back of your mind, because you spend most of the time saying, I haven't got time for that. So prayer and meditation and exposure therapy, counseling, arguably the active ingredient is just holding those off for a while and allowing the material that would pop into our heads anyway, but just let it happen, giving it a place to settle and form and connect. And so whether you're talking through a traumatic memory with a therapist, whether you're praying, whether you're meditating, certain forms of meditation do not do this, but some do. They are allowing those that unintegrated information about unresolved goals and conflicts to pop back in a safe space where we can make something new out of it. And eventually we're like, oh, yes, if only I can do it this way now, or this makes sense now, and I've seen it all together. I wasn't thinking about this time when I was 18, and I wasn't thinking about my relationship now, and I wasn't thinking about this all at the same time together. And now I see that they're connected. I can see that it's about me and my tendency to be like this. And so now I want to do something about it, So consciousness does that anyway, but certain contexts allow consciousness to do its work better. And those are coaching and counseling, arguably prayer, meditation, intrinsically from very small doses of psychedelics. All of them kind of suspend our usual internal control processes and allow a space for that material to be processed.
I think that's fantastic, and I think that's a great place to end for this evening. We do want to thank you, Warren, for joining us tonight. I know, Moose and I are just kind of like an odd going, wait a minute, this sounds very familiar, and the words are a little bit different. Reorganization reminds me of reorientation. So, Moose, any last thoughts?
Well, I've been sitting here like Googling and downloading Powers' papers, and I just looked up Dr. Ty about psychedelics. So like I have you've added a lot to my stack of things, because I guess I detect a lot of synergies, and I also think that they're probably more they're probably these sorts of things that we've been talking about are probably a lot more complementary, not necessarily anything that would replace. Like these things work in conjunction, and understanding PCT would augment my understanding of Boyd and McLuhan or Teilhard or whatever, and vice versa. So, and then the psychedelic angle at the end there, I was just sitting here looking up how to contact Sarah Tai.
Yeah, drop her a line. She's great.
Her work looks fascinating, and it looks like in UK, they probably have a different approach to psychedelics than we do here in the. They got rid of the Puritans and they sent them here, and the Puritans came over here that run our country.
It's an international research group that she works with.
Yeah.
But Sarah, because she's guided by PCT, has a very particular way of understanding how the psychedelics work.
Yeah. Again, we appreciate your time tonight, Warren.
No worries.
We'll just keep you on for a moment. Thanks again.